Pō Maria, everyone. Kia ora koutou, no mai haere mai. Welcome to the live chat today with Dr. Sarah Iono and myself, ko Kate Tokuingoa. And tonight we're talking about older kids play, which is really exciting. We've already had a quick little kōrero about it because there's some exciting news coming out, which we'll mention, I don't know, at the beginning or at the end. Yeah, I just wanted to introduce quickly Sarah, which you probably all know. You should know. Sarah, or Dr. Sarah Iono, she recently completed her doctoral research with Massey University. So she is pretty much the only one in Aotearoa who has any research about play, which is fantastic. Hopefully you've listened to her interview on RNZ last month. She was investigating the impacts of two models of professional development on supporting the effective teaching of play practices in the primary classroom. She's the CEO of Longworth Education. She's a facilitator. She speaks to bunches of people about play. She's a coach. She's a podcast creator. She's a blogger and just a huge play advocate within Aotearoa. And we are really lucky to have you. Cool. So tonight we're talking about older kids play, which is really exciting because it's kind of it's emerging, it's bubbling, and it really does feel like it's kind of coming to the surface. And there's some really brave kayako out there who are going in and are probably just going to be sitting here going, okay, what do? I need some confirmation, or I need something, give me something. So yeah, hopefully it's really supportive. Flick your questions at any stage and we'll hopefully get to them to the end. Sarah, is there anything else you want to mention before we get into the questions?
No, I'm just really excited we're having this conversation because it's such an important topic, and it's actually one I think with all the play, the sphere of play that I'm involved in, it's actually my passion area is the older kids, because I know if I was back in the classroom, if I stepped back into my old role as a classroom teacher, that would be the area that I would be working in getting play going for our older kids. So it's something that's very dear to my heart, is play in our older kids. So yeah.
All right, so we're going to dive straight in. So we know that play is becoming relatively more acceptable with those younger age groups, usually up to about year 2, and there's lots of research that supports that, but there's a lag with these older kids play. Why do you think that play with older kids is less acceptable or less common practice?
I think there's a number of things coming into to factor into that. But perhaps if we kind of firstly adjust the way we view play, because I think sometimes that gets in the way of seeing play for older kids. So when we think of play, we often think of it as a behavior. So it's something that the kids do. They go and play, or they're playing with the Lego, or they're doing Play-Doh, or they're constructing a fort. So we see play as the behavior. But what we're talking about in terms of play as a pedagogical tool is actually the mindset, the attitude that sits in behind that. And that's the gem that play gives our kids is, Peter Gray talks about an example where you can be watching two children playing with cardboard boxes, but to know which one is actually playing, we'd have to get inside their head and look at the motivation that's driving what they're doing in behind the actions that we can see as the adult looking in on the play. So I think this kind of stumps particularly teachers of older children, because we have in our head, so play in my class then with my year 6s means I've got to get out the Play-Doh and the cutters, and I've got to give them the chance to play with Play-Doh. And that gets in the way of seeing play and what it looks like for older kids. So that's one barrier, I think, to understanding play for older children. I think, too, there's an enormous societal pressure on children to grow up. We know that childhood and the length of childhood that children are engaged in should be a long time. We know from the neuroscience that actually childhood, we're one of the only species on Earth that has a really prolonged childhood time, and for good reason, because our brain needs all that time to fully develop, to the age of 25 or 30 for some people. So that's a really important thing. But society has this desire to have children enter into what's considered formal instruction as soon as possible. I mean, we're getting some understanding now that that shouldn't be the case at 5 and 6, but we also know that for many kids, 7, 8, 9, 10, they're still not ready for that formal instruction. Whether, I mean, that's debatable as to whether formal instruction is the most appropriate way that people learn. But, you know, there's a rush to get into that. And so we also, I think, then impose limits on ourselves or an idea around our role in that learning process, because we want children to, you know, with good intent, not miss out or not get behind, or make sure they're really successful, but within really narrow parameters of what we see learning and success to be. And probably the other point I want to make around that is that there's children out there who we categorize into their chronological age groups. You know, we say, well, when you're 10, and I know there's some researchers out there that really look at this kind of shift of 10-year-olds where we do kind of say as a society, well, you're 10, you know, play's over for you at 10. You've got to get a bit more serious about life. And yet we know that there are many children who haven't had rich play experiences in their early years and developmentally need that to continue their brain growth, to continue their physical development, their cognitive, their emotional, their social. So, you know, we need to look at children developmentally rather than chronologically. When I go into classrooms and senior end of the school, I can pick the kids who still need lots and lots of play. And for some of them, it is playing with Play-Doh, you know, as if they were a 4 or 5-year-old. But for a lot of other kids, they need play of a different kind. They need that playful mindset and that opportunity to have a playful attitude around their learning.
When you talk about, you know, play of a different kind, I guess, you know, there's lots of kaiako out there who are like, I'm doing it, but am I doing it right? You know, does this look, you know, I don't know. It's like, what does play for older kids look like is what some kaiako will be asking out there, I'm imagining. And what would you say to those teachers?
I think it's really important to reframe that, to think about what do we want our children to be experiencing? What do we want them to be learning? And then frame up how we will respond to that. Now, sometimes that learning involves some direct instruction, but a lot of the time the learning that we want is to have our children move into what we would call a state of play. So the space which becomes a creative space or a problem-solving space or an innovative space where they can play with ideas, play with language, play with solutions to problems. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about that mindset of play. When we're in that state of play, we're much more likely to take risks, to try different things. You know, we may want to, for example, experience this idea of going on a trip, you know, pretending to go on an airplane. And part of setting that up for children who are a bit older is giving them the opportunity to be playful with that, to, you know, create their own passports and set up the classroom like an airplane and have border control at the door coming in. It may seem simple or perhaps a little juvenile, but actually that's shifting kids into a state of play, which means that then their brain is in that space where they're going to be able to think differently, and they're accessing part of the brain that's a much more higher order part of the brain than if we were to give them a book to read about it, you know. So it's really not so much in what would I see going into a classroom, but what state of thinking or attitude would the children have if my classroom was a play-based classroom, particularly with older kids.
Cool. Yeah, I loved how you called it a state of play. I think we're going to come round back into kind of that state of play and what conditions that you kind of have to set for that state of play. But you touched on the neuroscience and the brain and how that's working. I mean, there's some incredible people, Nathan Makaire-Wallace and Maggie Dent, who are really bringing to surface that brain in adolescence. Do you have a way of unpacking that quickly for listeners, and how do you see that linking into play?
Yeah, I think there's I think there's a couple of things. I mean, I mentioned first of all that we need childhood to continue, right? So we need to be able to give our children time for their brain to come online and not push them too soon into things that their brain isn't ready for, particularly as they move into adolescence. We know from the brain science that move into adolescence is a really critical time for the brain. It's going into that pruning phase. It's working out the things that it needs and it's relevant, the things that it doesn't need anymore. Those absent stares sometimes from our teenagers when we think we're connected and we haven't. But we also know too that as the brain moves into those teen years, there's a really important part of the brain that's receiving the highest levels of dopamine that it's going to get in its lifetime. And that's that reward center of the brain. And so this is often where we see children engaging in risky behavior because it gives them a bit of a kick. We're getting outside of the things that we would do normally and safely. So what we want to do is kind of think, well, how can we provide conditions for children to be able to play, to experiment, to tinker, to take risks in a way that feeds into some of those reward centers in the brain. So it feels good. And the reward is not necessarily stickers or chocolate, but it might just be the success, the feeling of success in doing something and overcoming a challenge, or creating something new and getting feedback from that innovative or creativeness, solving a problem and how that feels when you're a problem solver. So these are all playful things that we can do that tap into that idea of risk and reward that the brain's working out at that time. And I think too, what's really important as well is our children, particularly in that year 3, 4, 5, 6 category, 7 and 8, are in a time of concrete operational development. So that space where they still need hands-on things, that they're not ready for abstract thought. And even if they are moving into more abstract thinking patterns, being able to have something to manipulate and to tinker with or to use as a model for solving a problem aids that brain development. We see it with adults, whenever there's a problem, we don't necessarily sit there and think about it abstractly, particularly if it's a mechanical problem or it's a sculpture problem, for example. We get our hands in and we have to work it out for ourselves, and that's playing. That's connecting the brain and the hand to try and get through and work through these solutions. So it's a really, really critical time that I think it's important that we don't just think that children are ready for pen and paper as they move towards high school, that there has to be much more hands-on. And I think one other thing too is that we notice in this time, particularly related to pretend play. And pretend play is stated, as one of the highest forms of play that you can have. And yet it looks very trivial when you're watching kids marching around in dress-ups and things like that. But it's actually a period of time for the brain to test out identities, to have a go at different roles and to try out things that perhaps wouldn't be acceptable if it wasn't under the guise of play, but because we're playing, it makes it a little bit more acceptable to our peers or to the adults around us, because it's just a bit of a muckabout. When actually we know moving into those teenage years that children are really wanting to experiment with their identity and their role and place in society, and this is a safe way for them to do it.
That's really beautiful. So you touched there on kind of those conditions and on tinkering. So I just wonder if you want to unpack a little bit, like how can we create that state of play as teachers? What conditions do we need to set? Yeah.
I think one of the key things is we have to be playful ourselves. We have to model it from the front. We have to model a sense of wonderment, a sense of risk-taking. We don't have to have all the answers. I think that's really important. And I know many teachers that are in play-based classrooms, particularly in the junior school, will know that it does shift to this place of I don't have to have everything prepared and I don't have to give you an answer because I'm the teacher expert. But what I do have to do is model how I'd go about finding that out. We have to get out of the way, and that's a really scary thing when we're so used to having our hand on the reins. But we have to be in a position to enable children to follow their passions. One thing that I know, as I said to you, I really love this age group, is that you see quite a intersection between children's urges, which we know drive decisions around how we enable play in the junior end of the school. So we might observe children who have a construction urge or a trajectory urge or enclosure, for example. But as children mature, we get this intersection with their interests as well. Younger children perhaps haven't been enough in the world to really have, apart from maybe a dinosaur fascination or a digger fascination, but they haven't had enough experience out there to kind of really get their teeth into an interest. And as children mature, we see these interests intersect with urges. And that's the connection to where that passion lies and potential talents and strengths lie in children. And that's where, as teachers, we need to be really vigilant and provide opportunities for children to follow their nose and follow those passions and strengths. And that way we can help our children, from a strengths-based perspective, instead of always being deficit-focused on things that we need to catch them up on or, address as weaknesses. We can really start to help our children see what their strengths are and give them time to just find that out. We don't all know that straight away, but if we get time to muck about, and I don't mean that as in, wasting time at school, but time in terms of mucking about with ideas and trying things out is a really useful way to be able to help our children connect with that.
So what I'm hearing is giving time for kids to explore ideas and really being able to see students' interests, urges. I mean, you used a range of words: interests, urges, passions, curiosities, talents, strengths. So I'm thinking underneath all of that, when you've got time as well, the power of observations. Like observations just be crucial.
Yeah, you have to be able to spend time mouth closed, just watching. I mean, you've got to create the physical environment for play. There's got to be opportunities for children to be able to engage with different types of materials and resources and ideas and talk to each other and get some interest going. What I have noticed for many teachers who start on this path is that they want to just say to the kids, tell me what you want to learn, or what's your passion project going to be about? And these 9-year-olds have got no idea. They don't know. They might say, and usually they want to sort of, I suppose, satisfy their teacher with an answer. So they'll say, oh, well, I'd like to learn about Mexican food. I like Mexican food. I might be interested in that. And so it becomes more a bit focused in on a project rather than helping the child having a range of experiences of things that they might be interested in and playing with those things. It's always nice when a child comes up with a project idea, because that's what we can do, right? We can manage that. We can resource it. There's a direction. They're probably going to do a presentation or a speech, or they'll bake something, or there'll be a product. When actually it's a little bit more disconcerting as a teacher to just let kids have a feel for it. And I know there's probably teachers out there going, oh, time's my thing that I never have enough of. And now you're telling me just to let them muck about for a bit, and I'm not saying all the time. I know that for some teachers, a way to do that is have that dedicated time when they first start. So it might be that Friday's their day where everything else gets chucked out and we get some resources out, we get some ideas going, we watch some YouTube clips that might be a bit inspiring, that sort of are an invitation to play with some ideas. And it becomes a bit of a fishing expedition to see what might light kids' fire a little bit. And it's just Friday. So that's okay. We can manage that as teachers. The more you do it, the more you start to see the children take ownership of it and want to do it at other times of the week when they don't have some of the things they've got to do, like reading and things. But that's a way to start. And the other way too is actually to help children to scaffold them in to play and thinking of their own ideas is to provide them with a bit of a menu of choice. And this is something we've done quite successfully with a number of classrooms where teachers have said, look, these kids have got no idea, they're already X number of years in school and they're just expecting me to tell them what to do and think and say. So we provide a menu that has creative options, playful options, design this or think about that or inquire about that. But we always make sure with that menu that there is a one choice there that says, pitch me your idea. Mm-hmm. If nothing on here is what you're interested in, come and talk to me and pitch me something that you want to do. And let's talk, right? Let's see if it's doable in our setting. So it just gives that option so that children have still got direction in what they want to do if they choose to. But these other choices enable a scaffolding for those kids that just need help to be a little bit more independent in their thinking.
I love how you called it the fishing expedition.
And it is, yeah.
It really is. And being able to see that whole learner. And it also made me think of the characteristics of play as well. And I was thinking about, you're giving them choice. It's really about the process rather than the product. They're making up their own rules, they're pitching to you ideas, and that imagination, role play for those older kids, it's so important. But I wonder if you want to tap into that last characteristic around, they really need to be, their brain can't be flipped, they can't be operating in their reptilian part of their brain. So what can you tell me about the research behind mental health and play for especially kids?
And I've got that diagram that I want to share with everyone that I mentioned to you, Stuart Brown's work, particularly around what the opposite of play is, in terms of our conditioning in our brain, which I know we'll share afterwards. But what we know is if we have all these benefits of play, right? So there's the development of interpersonal skills, there's the ability to manage conflict, there's joy in learning, there's flexibility in thinking, there's curiosity, there's intrinsic motivation, there's all these things, right, that we know play gives our children when they're engaged with it. If they don't have it, so if, for example, they come from a place where there is trauma, where they are in a situation where they are living in that survival or that fight or flight part of their brain, those are really high order thinking skills and really prefrontal cortex kind of stuff. And so we can't expect that from children when they are in a trauma response situation. And so we know too that children that come from those homes actually need more play. They need more and more of what they're not getting to try and counter some of the damage that may be happening because they don't have play in their lives. We know that, and if anyone's not familiar with Stuart Brown's work, he's a medical professional in the States. He's prolific, a very expert on play, but he's looked at it from the anatomical response, the mammalian response as animals that we are, the mammals that we are. And compared it with other creatures. And we know that when there's a withdrawal of play, that it can lead to the very opposite. So a lack of interpersonal connection, depression, conflict, lack of joy, a rigidity in our thinking. We can't think flexibly. So when we have all those things in place, we also know that leads to not so good a positive mental outlook. And we know that many of our children, particularly, over the last few years, things like pressures when it comes on to assessments at high school, getting to university or, passing or, dealing with social media, all these things that you and I didn't have as teens that are adding into the mix. We need our children to have some of those really high order capabilities, the ability to regulate their emotions, to be able to connect with people in a pro-social way. If they haven't had those experiences and developed those skills, then we do know that leads to increased risk for mental health issues. So it is more than just, do they learn through play? It's more about how play helps them cope with the world, and be resilient to the world that is ever changing for our young kids.
Yeah, especially in current day and time, right? How crucial is that?
Yeah, and I think in New Zealand we've been kept in a bit of a bubble because the way our COVID response has been so different from overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And they are doing studies on children now who have been locked at home for a year with no chance of a lot of physical play outside or connecting with their friends other than being online. And there is grave concern for that. They're not concerned about whether these kids are behind in their reading levels. They're really concerned with their state of being, which, if we don't get that right, they're not going to be able to read and write and do maths as well. So, yeah.
That's quite cool. Their state of being, state of play. There's two cool words. I know we're running out of time, so I'm just going to put it out there. If you've got any questions, fire them through on the comments part of this chat. Maybe while we're wrapping up, Sarah, are you okay talking about this whole getting ready concept of, the transitioning? You've got to get them ready for whatever, it might be from the middle school to the upper school. It might be from primary into intermediate. It might be from intermediate into high school. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's something that we battle with, and I guess I challenge teachers who feel a pressure to be thinking about where their year twos are going next year into year three, or their year fives are going into year six, or their year eights going into year nine, that they're worrying that they're not preparing them for that next year. And what we need to remember is we've got them now, that they're year twos now, and that when they're year three, they'll be doing year three stuff, for some of them who are typically developing. And our best approach to preparing children is to actually give them a sense of well-being, a sense of identity as a learner, a capability and a strengths-based outlook on what they can do, rather than always feeling they've got to get ready for something. If we're constantly getting ready for something, we're never in the space where we can actually celebrate what we can do and what we're good at and know ourselves in that space. So if we know ourselves and we know what we're good at and we can stand tall with that, then we can deal with the next thing that comes along. And I know it's something that many intermediate teachers worry about for high school. And I know the high school setting, many of our kids go into very traditional high school settings. And, coming from intermediates where it's much more progressive in the way that we help our children learn in that setting. But actually, if we are able to set our kids up to know who they are, to know what their strengths are as learners, to know how to ask for help, to know how to get along with people and connect with people, that's getting them ready, because that's life, rather than worrying about an exam or sitting the next test or, managing themselves in a high school setting. We have to look at the whole person and the identity of our learners.
I've heard the word resilience come up multiple times and how important that is in our day and age, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And very much so, as being able to, I think children who engage in play and have the freedom to be in that state of play are able, it's like they become 10 foot tall and bulletproof, it's like, well, I've got this, where when we've got children who are not sure what they're good at, or know they're not good at many things because they might be those kids that really struggle. Often those kids that really struggle, we with good intent constantly work on their deficits, that we don't give them a chance to grow their strengths. And play enables those kids to grow strengths and perhaps areas that we wouldn't think of. They might be the best constructor in the classroom because they can see things in a different way, but they might not be able to spell or, speak confidently in front of people. But when you've got a visual problem in front of you, that's what they can nail. And so if we're able to help them see those strengths, then they can manage the areas that they might need to work on to get through school and to get through life with a sense of confidence. But if we're constantly working on those deficits, what strengths can they celebrate?
Yeah. Hey, we've just had a question come in, and I'm not going to try and pronounce. It's an Irish name, and sorry, I don't know how to say it, but it's a really great question. How would you help students new to year 5 and 6 in a play classroom transition from an urge-based year 3 and 4 play setting?
I would get to know their interests. The urges play out in the interests. So, talk to the previous teacher who will probably have some data around what those urges might be, those common urges. Don't be afraid to start with urges, though, because those urges don't stop. There's no magic turn off for those. That we, as adults, we still have those drives. We just know, what's a bit more socially acceptable and not, in terms of our play. But those urges will continue to inform the play. But it's about getting to know that child and the interests that they might be starting to explore in relation to what those urges might be. And as I mentioned too, that the offering the menu really helps children step into that space and take a few risks, and get to know you as a teacher as well. Because, as I said earlier, one thing we have to do is model being playful and being in a state of play ourselves. And kids need to feel safe to be in that state, and they take their cues from you, the teacher. So if you're a teacher who celebrates thinking playfully, taking risks, trying new things, wanting to learn different stuff about, whoever's interest is prominent in the room at the time, then they're going to feel safe to explore those with you in the vicinity. So help them with the menu. They might want to create their own menu of choices based on their interests. One thing I would say about that, though, is just be really careful. Don't focus on knowledge related to interests. Don't let it be about, if we've got a love of cooking, don't let it be about, right, well, I want you to find out, the top 5 Mexican food recipes, because that's stuff that we can find on Google in a minute flat. We want to be able to help our children be playful in their thinking. So, take this recipe and try and add a different taste or texture or flavor to it. Or how would you pitch this restaurant level food to a 5-year-old? So thinking about the process rather than just spewing back out knowledge is really important. And it's a trap we sometimes fall into. So yeah, help them by identifying interests. Don't discount the urges. Use that as your baseline data, and then provide menus of choices until you can see them starting to feel confident in articulating what it is they want to explore more.
Cool. Yeah. All right, just wrapping up, so there's kaiko out there that are doing older kids play in some way, shape or form. What support, where would they go to? What is Longworth offering those teachers at the moment?
So we are working across kahui-ako, we're working across whole schools, full primary schools, schools who want to see play across their school setting, and we work from, Northland to Dunedin. And what I guess really for those teachers to tap into is having a conversation with us around what that might look like. We're ministry accredited, so we can provide PLD through accredited funding. So if schools want to have us in and want to be funded for it, then we can talk about how that might look. We also have an online on-demand webinar that talks about play in the upper primary, which is a fantastic webinar. It kind of gives an overview of some things that you need to know about play and older children. So there's lots of different options there. The thing that I would recommend the most, that we know from the research I was involved in, is that what teachers know and believe about play often differs to their practice. And we know for many of our teachers in the senior end of the school, they know play is important, they value it, but they don't quite know how to do it and what it looks like in day-to-day practice. And that's where we can come in and support in the classroom, on the ground, helping teachers work through those practice-based decisions, which are unique to every teacher in every classroom context. So that's something that we can come in and support you with. Doesn't always have to be us in as well. We can do it on Zoom and have chats on Zoom as well. So there's plenty of options there to support teachers.
Cool. And we're going to be talking about it for the next few weeks on the Joy of Play Facebook page. So please just keep sending in questions, sending in examples, photographs. It's just such a great forum of learning from each other. Also, another great tool or resource out there will be the new podcast interview that you've done with Bevan. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm really excited. Actually, just finished an interview with Bevan Holloway this morning. Bevan, up until recently, was one of our Longworth facilitators. He's now off pursuing his own passion project, which you can hear more about on the podcast. So we have episode 4 now up on Spotify, and Bevan is the ex-head of Department of English at Wellington Girls College. He's also an or a Vince Ham E-Fellow from 2018, and he's researched play pedagogy in a senior or secondary school English setting. He's a really vocal supporter of play for children at high school level. And in our podcast, we delve into a lot of those questions we've touched on tonight, particularly around play for older kids, why it's important, why it's so difficult to see at secondary school level at the moment, getting kids ready, this concept of readiness for high school and things like that. So it's a really, really cool interview that I'm really excited to share with everyone.
Yeah, I've had a sneaky listen as well, and it's just, it would be a really fabulous extension on listening to this talk, because there's lots of crossover, and there's just hearing that again, and that banter that goes on between Sarah and Bevan getting excited, and it's a really, really fascinating talk to listen to. Is there anything else that you wanted to add at the end?
No, I just think I think this takes bravery, and to take my hat off to those teachers who are really pioneering this for our senior school end. Congratulations on stepping outside of the mold, if you like. And I know, Wellbeings talks about that disruptive teaching, being a creative teacher, doing things differently. And this is what this requires of teachers, particularly for our older kids. There are a few more pressures, whether they're real or perceived, on our teachers of older children. And to be able to try and foster some playfulness and grow that state of play in a senior school classroom takes a level of bravery, and we need to support those teachers to do more. So kia kaha, keep going. And I'm only ever an email away. I encourage people to email me if they're stuck, if they've got questions, message us on Facebook. We're here to help. So keep going is what I'll say.
Oh, yeah. It's when you talk about these kayako, it's like they're the risk takers. They're modeling that resilience, really, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
And learning and being a lifelong learner is what we ultimately want.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for joining. We're sorry we've gone about 10 minutes over. Again, just pop your questions in and keep the conversation going on the Facebook group, and have a beautiful night. Ka kite anō.